to be our ammonia. Without getting super technical, what we're going to do is we're going to go overly lean, and from this overly lean, right, we're going to trap it in this layer that's inside this cap, and we're going to convert that to ammonia. And then we're going to go overly rich, and we're going to release the ammonia. So in essence, it's doing the same thing, but it's a low grade. It's not as accurate. But we don't need what you just said on gas, because we use that. And NAC. You can Google it if you want to know more. Or we can schedule a special class for it. But so all the SCRs are, the top of the line would be SCR with DEF, or an NAC, and then the lower of those would be LNTs. Okay, and in diesels, right, we want to know how much that black stuff is coming out, and it's called opacity. And it's basically the percentage. So 100% opacity is, Ray Charles with sunglasses on, right? You can't see shit through it, right? I used to say Stevie Wonder, but I want to give Ray Charles some props. Okay, and we're going to have temperature problems, right? We had a cooling system chapter. Remember that when we start getting in higher temperatures, our oil starts to thin out, losing its lubrication properties, and we also start having the oil forming varnish, right? That's why if you ever looked at like aluminum engines and you take the valve cover off and it looks yellowish in there, like, oh shit, it should be not yellow in here, because people are going to run it low and it makes a film until it finally forms carbon. Okay, thermostat is our chief regulating device. We have to slow the bus down to pick up passengers, right? Because if it's moving too fast, it can't pick up heat. Yes, ultimately the gauge shows us that it's cool, but it's the coolant, not the engine. The engine's actually running hotter. You're not picking up a passenger. And that passenger is 20 degrees, roughly, right? When we drop them off in the radiator. Okay. We talked about intake manifolds. We said that if your method of bringing fuel into this engine is going to be air and fuel together, your intake has to be metal of some sort, or suffer the consequences of it blowing up with a backfire. Once you're bringing fuel differently and you're only bringing in air, you can continue to use metal if you wanted to, but now you have the luxury of using plastic, which now is smoother inside, and now we also have the possibility of having long and short runners, easier to design. Remember, we want to have a longer path at lower RPMs for better torque transition, and a shorter path, both of them will equal better filling of the cylinder, right? Long path, slow speed, you're bringing all the air in. If you're long and you're moving fast, you can't bring this much air. So shorter you can bring it. So both, by varying the intake runners, we increase volumetric efficiency at both ends of the spectrum. Long runners for low end torque, short runners for high end speed power. On there. Okay, cracked exhaust manifold. Obviously, if we have a cracked exhaust manifold in a fairly modern car using O2 sensors, we have the possibility of having pulse air, right? Your siphon gun works on that same principles. You have your little blowgun, and it has a little hose coming out the bottom, right? So if I have this hose and I pop it in liquid and I blow across it, I pick up liquid and I'm spraying it, right? So the same thing, if I have this exhaust leak, I'm picking up fresh air, diluting my O2 sensor, thinking that I'm lean when I'm not lean. Right? So it can have that effect. Talked about that, especially if it's upstream of the sensor. Like obviously, if my leak is beyond my sensor, it's not going to come backwards. Depends on where it is. Okay, so we already know that our oxygen, generally speaking, that we call oxygen, our atmosphere, really we're nitrogen based. 80% of our air is nitrogen based. 20%, just keeping simple numbers. Actually, there's fractions of other things. So depending upon the inversion layer, heat and all that, anywhere from 20 to 21% oxygen. The ratio of oxygen to nitrogen always remains the same, except it thins out. So if I'm at sea level, it's 20%. If I'm at Mount McKinley, it's 20%. There's just less of it, but the ratio is still 20%. Right? Because we have physical altitude, physical density, those things are changing, but the ratio is the same. Colder the air, the heavier it is, the more oxygen that's in it. Blah, blah, blah. We're talking about O2 sensors. Right? Didn't go into detail in this series. We will go into details, but basically that's what we're going to be using to tell us how close we were to getting it right, or how close we were not, so we can make adjustments. It is what we use as a final yes, no. We talked about volumetric efficiency, how well it can breathe. Today we started talking a little bit more in depth. Right? And this is being way, way too generous. Right? Diesels are the closest thing to 80% efficiency. Gasoline, believe it or not, is in the 60, 65. But today's gasoline engines are